You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Karin Slaughter.
Thanks for tuning in to Author Stories today. We've got a fantastic show lined up for you. Before we get into that, I'd like to tell you about some sponsors today. Crystal Pico Watanabe at Pico's House. The Pico's House website now has a new look. She's got a team of 8 people who help provide services to fiction authors. She has a full slate of services that now include beta reading. She's got 4 beta readers now. So if you're looking for beta reading services, she can definitely take on your project. Manuscript critique, developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Authors can also inquire about putting their books in her Book Lovers Box, which is a monthly digital subscription box with a different theme each month. It's free to authors for a limited time. Be sure to check out Crystal and her whole team at Pico's House. That's PIKKOSHOUSE.com. Thanks, Crystal, for sponsoring the show. While cape and spandex movies are breaking box office records, comic book commentator and influencer Ed Gosney doesn't want us to forget the roots of these marvelous wonders. His blog, Cool Comics in My Collection at edgosney.com, covers the gamut of 4-color entertainment, from contemporary comic books to comics made for kids to bargain bin gold to classics that will transport you back in time. Comic books are a perfect blend of art and story, and Cool Comics captures the essence of what these funny books mean to us in a personal way. And make sure to join the Cool Comics in My Collection Facebook group, where members can interact, show off their prized comics, and have opportunities to win. You guessed it, Cool Comics. Published weekly, Cool Comics in My Collection aims to bring you a smile and reminds us why comic books are fun. Be sure to visit edgosney.com today. Speaking of superheroes and comics, my friend Patricia Gilliam has a fantastic series called The Heroes of Corvus. It begins with Book 1, a flight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the deaths of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city aren't out of danger. This is such a phenomenal story. She has released up to part 4 now, and I cannot wait for part 5 to come out. If you're looking for a great adventure read that's on the cutting edge of what is in today's entertainment, The Heroes of Corvus is the series for you by Patricia Gilliam. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to go to hankgarner.com to subscribe to the show. We're on just about every platform you can imagine. Now stay tuned for our show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm really excited to have Karin Slaughter on the show with me today. She has a brand new book in the Will Trent series called The Last Widow. And guys, this is, Karin, I believe this is your best book yet. Thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Karin, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, it starts with my dad. My dad was a great storyteller, and most of his stories were scary. He had 3 daughters, and I grew up during a time when the way men related to their daughters was to just constantly scare the crap out of them. And so he would give us cautionary tales, like the little girl who left open the refrigerator door and died, or the little girl who touched the thermostat and died. So there was a real theme to him being able to save money on our electric bill. But
right.
I loved listening to him, and I loved the idea that, when you tell a story, you're giving somebody a gift. You're taking them out of their life, and you're putting them in a new world. And, I mean, it's just a wonderful thing to be able to do. And so for me, the idea of picking up a pen and writing down some of my thoughts and trying to scare people, that was the whole point of living, as I just wanted to be able to do what my dad was doing.
Well, Karin, I have 3 daughters, and I feel like now that I have fallen down on my job.
Exactly, yeah. Well, a lot of my books were about my sisters being murdered or mutilated or anything that would get them in trouble, so I would be an only child. That was really the focus of my work. And my dad thought those were hilarious. My sisters didn't. But he would give me a quarter every time I wrote one of those books. So I wrote a lot of revenge fantasies, let's just put it that way.
So a lot of positive reinforcement from the parents. That's
exactly.
Good. Yeah. That's fantastic. At what point did this go from hobby and personal fascination to, I think I might be able to do this?
I started from the moment I got out of high school. Of course, I was in college, and I was a really horrible student. And being in college was the only time in my life that I didn't feel like writing. So it wasn't for me. I dropped out after 3 years, and once I dropped out, I thought, okay, well, what are you going to do now? Because there's no way you're moving back home. Dad's made that clear. He patted me on the shoulder when I graduated and said, you can do anything in the world you want to do except have your old bedroom back. So I was really given a message early on that I could not be a starving artist on his dime. And I just knuckled down. It's the same thing. Lee Child talks about this. He had lost his job, and he thought, I can, get another job, or I can do what I've been saying I've wanted to do for years, which is write a book. And we both chose to write books. But, probably for Lee and me, we're 2 people out of 1 million who made the same decision. So we're also aware of how lucky we got.
Love it. You have a fantastic accent. Where do you hail from?
Jonesboro, Georgia, an hour outside of Atlanta. And when I was growing up, it was considered to be a very small town, and now it's mostly considered a suburb.
Yeah. I'm also from the South. I'm from South Mississippi, and
yep.
There's this thread that runs through Southern culture of storytellers. Do you feel like that the culture and the place that you grew up in has affected the way you tell stories or the kinds of stories that you tell, other than your dad instilling that love of scaring people?
Well, absolutely. We drink it from our mother's milk, this idea of storytelling, and probably you're the same way as me, especially coming from Mississippi, where we just gossiped all the time. And then,
right.
You're in New York now, is that right?
No, I'm still in Mississippi.
Oh, you're still in Mississippi. I'm sorry. But the thing that really surprises me, and Kitty Stockett said this best, being in New York, they think it's rude to gossip, and in the South, gossip is our currency. So, that's a real big difference there. And, I feel it. I feel it in my bones. I'm a Southern writer. I'm proud to be a Southern writer. I'm proud of the fact that I live in a city that is a majority African-American city with the largest African-American middle class of any major American city. I mean, it's so diverse here and interesting, and the thing that we all share is our love of stories, and that is a very Southern thing. You do gossip about your neighbors and your family, and when I would go to church, I remember as a little girl, my grandmother would take me out, and she was really not at a good church. I mean, they were one generation away from snake handling. I'm not making that up. But the preacher got bit, and he died. And my grandmother said, "Oh, poor preacher, he didn't believe enough."
Right.
We would go every Easter, and we would sit in church in my grandmother's pew beside her, and we'd be in the little pink dresses with the underwear with the ruffles and the white patent leather shoes, and we were threatened within an inch of our lives that we couldn't fidget or move or even draw on the back of the circular. And when we had to sit ramrod straight, couldn't pick our nose, she'd snap the fire out of us if we did. And then the important part was after church, where we would have to be polite to all her friends. She'd say, oh, Miss Johnson, here's my little grandchildren, and we would have to say, oh, good morning, Miss Johnson, and, show our good manners. But as soon as that woman turned her back, my grandmother would say, well, she drinks, or her husband's a cheat, or her son's a bit touched in the head. I mean, she would just always tell these horrible secrets about these people, doing it out of the side of her mouth and smiling at the next woman coming that she was going to gossip about. And that's just a very Southern way of growing up, is, knowing everybody's business, knowing everybody's deep, dark secret, but God forbid if they talk about yours, because that's rude.
Right. Well, those traits come in really handy for a suspense thriller mystery writer.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you're writing a thriller, basically you're just controlling the passage of secrets. The big secret is who done it, but the clues along the way, those are secrets too. And figuring out how to hide those in plain sight is also a useful skill.
Sure. You mentioned a minute ago the town that you live in and the diversity of that town, and through most of the South, that is the truth of the way culture is we are most Southern towns have a high population of white and African American and immigrants as well, and the things that you see on the news and in the movies are the idiots always get highlighted, but the truth and the reality is usually a lot better than that. How do you portray the South and the true diversity of where we live in your books? And is that something important to you that you highlight to the rest of the world?
Well, absolutely. But I think first we need to make clear Florida is not the South, and they are.
Oh, absolutely not.
There. And
absolutely
Texas
not.
is some country. That's not really the South. So what we're talking about is the real South here. And it's extremely diverse. And I never will forget, I was talking to a friend of mine in Connecticut, and she was saying, well, Connecticut is one of the most liberal states in the country. And, there are more members of the ACLU here than anywhere else in the country. And I said, but your minority population is less than 2%. And she said, well, that's because they can't afford to live here. And I thought, this is what we call polite
congratulations.
racism
Right,
and redlining. But, yeah, I mean, the thing is about being a Southerner is, there are different types of Southerners, and there are the rednecks and the hillbillies, and a lot of them are in my family, and God bless them, because I certainly come from that. But there are also people who adhere to the lost cause narrative, and there are people who say, hey, guess what? Slavery was really bad, and Jefferson was not in love with his slave. He owned her. There are people who look at it in a different way. And, there's a good mixture here and varying opinions. And, it used to be we all got along no matter what, whether we were Libertarian or Democrat or Republican. I remember when I was growing up, my dad was the only Democrat in our entire neighborhood. Everybody else was a Republican. And they treated him like he was for tech and everybody else was for UGA. Well, something's wrong with him, but we'll still have a beer with him. And people got along. They just thought you were wrong. They didn't think you were wrong and you were going to hell and we need to kill you. So, it's kind of different now. And, people don't understand Georgia's a very mixed state politically now. We had a lot of people come here from the film and television world. Of course, our governor did everything he could to get rid of them, but not the billions of dollars they bring. We have a lot of young professionals here. We have a very dynamic, as you said, minority population. I mean, just in the Atlanta area alone, we have 1 million Mexican Americans living here. And so when I write about Atlanta in my books, I'm mindful that I'm not just telling my story. I mean, my family's crest has a jar of Elmer's glue in it because we're so white. But I am mindful that I am writing about a city and a police force when I write about the Atlanta police that is a good mixture of people. And, part of that we owe to our great mayor, Maynard Jackson. And, he was a visionary in many ways, but the thing that made him most effective was that he loved getting money for the state. And he loved getting money for Atlanta and our city services. And so he would go to the white people in power, because, they're everywhere in the world. There are always white people in power. I don't know how they do it. And he would say to him, look, I know you don't want to hire a bunch of black cops, but the federal government will give us $20 million if we hire 10% of our force as black. And they'll give us another $10 million if the half of those are women. And so now we have one of the first African-American female police chiefs in the country. We had one of the first African-American female sheriffs in the country for Fulton County. And, that was Maynard Jackson saying, hey, it's not black and white, it's green. Let's get some money in here and let's diversify. Right. And let's, we were one of the only few cities that has not seen massive race riots. We're the birthplace of the civil rights movement with Ebenezer Church down the street from where I live. And part of that is because of money. Coca-Cola did not want to be from a city where bad things were happening, and they spent their money very wisely to make sure everybody had a little piece of everything they wanted, and that's what's been most effective, I think. They call it the city too busy to hate, and we certainly have our issues, like every major American city, with systemic racism, and even though our police force is more diversified, we have our issues, but I think that as far as progress, we've made a lot of progress. And when I'm writing about police officers in Atlanta, I know that more than likely is going to be a person of color. And I want to respect that. And I can't write from their point of view, but I can certainly make sure that in my books they are not invisible.
One thing about Southern writing, Southern literature, there's this great thing that a lot of writers have used, going back to Faulkner, where we make up fictional towns and counties and place people in them. Where did Grant County come from for you?
Well, part of it is I just thought I don't want to get a bunch of letters with people saying to me, hey, you can't take a left on Main Street. So I'm going to make Grant County this fictional town. Hartsdale's fictional. And I still got letters from people saying you can't take a left on Main Street. And I would say, could you please show me on a map in Grant County, Georgia, where this magical Main Street is? But, I mean, it's a kind of amalgamation of where I grew up in Clayton County, but I moved it further south because I wanted to be further away from Atlanta. And that was Forest Park, Jonesboro, and Morrow, Georgia. And they've completely changed now. We did this great thing right before the Olympics. We didn't want the world to know we had poor people, so we made them all move out. And we said, we're going to give you a voucher, and you can move back in after the Olympics. And then, after the Olympics, of course, all the vouchers had expired. But they moved them to the south side of Atlanta, and it really changed those neighborhoods and a way that was irresponsible, I think. Just as a person living in Georgia, they could have done it a lot better and given people the tools to thrive and survive rather than cutting them off in such a way that really guaranteed failure. But that's another story. But that was the area I grew up in, and it had a community college, and it had, a really interesting dynamic with the state government because there were a lot of powerful politicians from that area who got stuff for Clayton County that it didn't necessarily need. Like the airport, for instance, a little bit of it is in Clayton County. Just by accident, the runway was a couple of miles longer than it needed to, or a couple of feet longer than it needed to be so that Clayton County could get some tax revenue from the airport because of that. And that's the kind of town I wanted to write about, was what I knew. But I knew that also I needed to put it somewhere where no one said, oh, well, you're talking about this case from Clayton County, or you're talking about this, or whatever. And, of course, that didn't work out. But that was my goal when I started thinking about Grant County, was let's make it familiar, but I want to fictionalize it so that it's not readily identifiable.
Right. And from the Grant County series, we got the fantastic character of Sara Linton. Sara Linton, in your new book, is with her friend Will Trent, and this is which. How many books is this in the Trent series now? That
this
the
is
new
number
book?
9.
Number 9.
Yeah.
What What brought these characters together in the beginning?
Well, really, it was my fault, because I wrote about Sara in Grant County for 6 books. And as I was writing in Grant County, I thought, there's going to come a point where people are going to ask, why is anybody living in this town? There are rapists and pedophiles and murderers and serial killers, and, it's worse than Congress. So we need to figure out a way exactly. I needed to figure out a way to keep writing these stories, but give myself a more believable palette to paint them on. And that ended up being the city of Atlanta, where it's believable that any number of horrific things could happen and people would still live here, because that's what happens every day. But initially, when I was writing about Sara, I was thinking about her as I'm working on the next book now, which will be the 10th Will Trent book with Sara, and it will also be the 20th book that I've written. So there's 2 hallmarks there for me. But I was thinking about how much she changed, and I felt really proud of that, because from the beginning of the series, when I wrote Blindsided, the first Grant County book, my goal was to have the characters respond to what was happening. Because I love crime fiction. I've been reading crime fiction since I could hold a book open. And what I always hated was, you get a Spencer book or you get some other kind of book, and in book 15, what had happened in books 1 through 14 really didn't matter, right? And they'd seen some really awful things. And every crime scene, they were like, this is the worst crime scene I've ever seen in my life. And you think, well, did you read your book before? Because that was pretty bad, too. And I wanted them to grow. And so Sara has changed demonstrably. We first meet her in Blindsided. She's very black and white. This is right, this is wrong, I'm not going to cross that line. And then as the series progresses and she loses her husband, she becomes a widow, she realizes that nothing is really permanent, and that sometimes you have to cross the line, and that all you can rely on is your better judgment. And so the Sara we have in The Last Widow is doing something that the Sara in Blindsided might not have ever done. And she's in a bad situation because I put her there, and she is using her medical knowledge to try to find ways to hurt people and hopefully kill them, when in all the previous books she was using it for good and as a healer, and that was not a line she was going to cross.
Was it fun to kind of turn her on her literary head and explore those possibilities?
Well, it was for a couple of different reasons, and one that might not be so obvious, because Sara is a woman, and she's a very strong, opinionated woman, not to sound too much like a Dolly Parton song, and she is a businesswoman. She owned her own business for years. She's very secure in herself, and some women really don't like that. I love reading about Jack Reacher. Nothing bad's going to happen to Jack Reacher. He's never going to sit down and stare at his navel and say, why am I doing this? Why do I keep shooting people in the kneecaps? He's just going to keep moving forward. But if a woman did that, women would have a big problem with it. And so with Sara, I had to be very careful in the beginning not to make her too perfect, not to make her too accomplished, not to have her sex life be the best sex life ever, because women don't respond well to that for the most part. Some people did. So, but now I feel like the times have changed, and I don't know whether it's the Me Too movement or just women talking more about what it is to be a woman, or the fact that it's kind of okay to be a woman now and to be interested in, football or music or whatever, and nobody's going to say, well, the only reason you care about guitar playing is because your boyfriend likes it, or the only reason you're doing this is because it will impress boys. We don't really have that kind of stuff that was around when I was growing up. And I think that women are more open to successful women, and they're more open to cheering for them. And so that's what I was thinking about as I'm writing this next book with Will and Sara is, the world has kind of caught up with her, where it's okay to be a successful woman, where it's okay that she makes mistakes, and those mistakes don't define her. And a lot of times you have Tony Soprano type characters, and everybody's totally fine with Tony being a horrible person. The character they're mad at is Carmela, because she's always nagging at him. And you think, Well, she's nagging at him because he's cheating on her with prostitutes. He's lying about where he is. It's the same thing with Walter White and Skylar. He's selling meth. Why are you rooting for him and getting mad at her for not liking that he's selling meth? I mean, Why is she the bad guy here?
It's such a weird thing that we do with characters we choose to love and invest emotionally in. It's a strange thing that we would never do in real life, I don't think.
Well, I would hope so. I
Yeah.
remember many years ago, Carol Shields gave an interview. It was one of her last interviews before she passed away. She was a tremendous writer, and she won the Pulitzer Prize. And the interviewer was asking her about being a female writer. What's it like being a woman in this business? And she said, any time a man writes a book, it's going to be considered more important than when a woman writes a book, even if it's about the same subject matter. And I remember just letting that sit in my head a little bit and thinking, my God, National Book Award winner, Pulitzer Prize winner, and she's still having this happen. What hope do I have? And in a lot of ways, it informed me as a writer because I thought, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to write the books I want to write. I'm going to do what I love for a living, which not many people can say that they're doing exactly what they want to do for a living. And I'm going to just concentrate with every single book on being the absolute best writer I can be at this moment in time. And that is the only thing I can control. And that's what I'm going to focus on.
Well, the new book, The Last Widow, it opens up with the scene, and Will and Sara find themselves, in the knee deep in the situation as usual. But this book takes some really interesting twists and turns, and there's a thing that you do that I really love in this book, and we see the scene kind of over and over through the book, but from different perspectives and from different people's perspectives. When you have a new book that you're working on, when one first comes alive to you, how do you start thinking about the things that you're going to put your characters through in that book?
Well, for this story, I took a little break over a couple of years, and I wrote The Good Daughter and pieces of her as standalones. And the fact is, I had this idea before those novels, but I just did not feel ready to write it. I never want to force myself to write a story that I'm not passionate about. And part of that is because I spend over a year of my life working on it, and then I spend another 6 months talking about it. And I want to be a credible person talking about it and be proud of it. So sometimes I wait on stories. And the idea for The Last Widow actually came to me 3 or 4 years ago. I was speaking with one of my contacts in law enforcement. He's a federal agent. And I said, what's the number one thing you're worried about right now? And I thought he'd say the opioid crisis or corruption in police forces or undertraining in police forces, which is a real issue, is lack of training, or, terrorism or something like that. And he said, the number one thing I'm worried about is white supremacist domestic extremists, because they are really gearing up. And I remembered this when I saw the footage from Charlottesville, because people look at that event as an aberration, and they need to know that this was highly organized. There were multiple events prior to this that were smaller and didn't get as much attention. This was deliberately planned for violence. These groups are on the internet. They're organizing. They came from 30 different states. There's 4 or 5 main organizations who really push their members to go to this. It's not just a coincidence. They all showed up wearing the same outfits, which were uniforms, carrying the same type of tiki torch from Pier 1. That did not just, wow, what a crazy thing. You all showed up wearing the same thing. How embarrassing. That was planned to every detail, down to what kind of shoes they were going to wear. And they went there with the intention of committing violence, which they did. They conspired to hurt people. They wanted to kill people. One woman was murdered. And that was all deliberately done. And they are still planning events like that. There was just one recently in Seattle. And what they're getting now is something that has delighted them, and that is false equivalency. You know, people, when these groups started being known, they're doing something that they hadn't done before. They're wearing what they call ghost skins. So they look like a normal guy who would be your next door neighbor. You know, they wear ties, they wear shirts, they don't have Nazi tattoos, they don't shave their heads and wear the combat boots, which is what we associate with Nazism and white supremacy. You know, the Timothy McVeigh type of person. These guys want to blend in. They're recruiting from the military, they're recruiting from the police forces. They want to have that kind of military training to bring about a race war, and they are delighted that because they look normal, or quote-unquote normal, they are being given equal time as if their opinions are valid. I mean, we saw the same thing happen with global warming, where you had a scientist with 8,000 degrees talking with some nut job who just didn't believe in it, and they were both given equal airtime on CNN because that's called balanced reporting. No, there's a right and there's a wrong. These guys are wrong, and they're mostly guys. You know, weirdly, white supremacists don't tend to be feminists. They want women to be, you know, women are one rung above minorities in their echelon, I guess, but not by much. They should just be, you know, there for sexual gratification and then go away and cook dinner. I mean, this is really how they feel. There's not a lot of daylight between Al-Qaeda and ISIS trying to create a caliphate and American white supremacists trying to create a holy land here. They all talk about bringing about a race war. I mean, that goes back to Manson. It goes back to the Turner Diaries, where they advocate creating a race war. They want to create a caliphate of Christian identity movement or whatever in America, you know, and it's really funny because we hear these crackpot stories. Oh, there's going to be Sharia law in America, and my cop friends say you shouldn't be worried about that. You should be worried about these nut jobs who we grew on our own soil, who are trying to change America. Those are the ones who worry the police the most. And so when I started looking into this, I thought this is what I want to write about.
Well, and it's that and so much more in this book. This is when I said in the beginning that I thought this was your best book, I really mean it. This is it's dense and fun at the same time. The pages just keep turning. Karin, I wish we could talk all day, but if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all that you do, is there a place where they can find you online?
Absolutely. They can go to my website, KarinSlaughter.com, or if they want to see pictures of my cats or videos of me dancing, they can go on my Facebook page.
Excellent. And that's the sound of everyone clicking over to your Facebook page right now. Karin, this has been so much fun talking. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of The Last Widow. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories podcast. Be sure to subscribe at hankgarner.com or on your favorite podcasting app. Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, child of the jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet." "Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.